likely to be a benchmark in the world of analysis of SMEs going forward for many years to come. So thank you for attending this gathering, and I will immediately give the floor to the Executive Director of the ITC, Rancho Gonzalez, to elaborate on the key findings.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you. Thanks to all of you for sharing your lunch with us, literally. Allow me to start by thanking the ITC team, who's been working like hell for over a year now to put to you what we think is, or at least this is how we see this, a practical tool for all of you wanting to find answers to how do we improve the competitiveness of small and medium enterprises. So as such, what we want to do with this report, the first in what will become a flagship from ITC to all of you once a year, is to complement research by other organizations, most importantly World Trade Organization and UNCTAD, focusing again on practical tools at the disposal of policymakers, governments, trade and investment support institutions, and last but not least, the companies themselves to improve their competitiveness. Now, why SMEs? It's a question that I don't think even what we read everywhere requires much dwelling, but let me say why we thought it was important to look at the SME angle. One, the mere fact that 95% of businesses around the world are SMEs, that 70% of employment around the world is SMEs, but that SMEs only contribute to 50% of value addition in our economies is our starting point. We see in looking at SMEs three big missing. Missing number one, especially acute in developing countries, the missing middle. We see in developing countries lots of very small companies, often less than 10 employees, and very large companies, and a big missing middle in their economies, which makes for less dynamic, less innovative, less competitive economies. We see a second missing, and it's a missing link with inclusive growth. What we know is that SMEs have the ability to trickle down the growth, especially when SMEs are employers or owned by women, by youth. They have an ability to permeate the growth to more destitute levels of our economies. Three, we see a third miss, which is a missing participation of small and medium enterprises in international trade. Now, this last part is particularly important, since what we know, what economists tell us, is that firms who internationalize, those that participate in trade and international investment, are better at productivity, they are better at employing, and they are better in terms of the wages they pay. So if we want, again, more growth and more robust growth, one that trickles down, helping SMEs internationalize is a big part of the answer. Now, we also know that not every way of internationalizing is the right one. And this is why what we are advocating is internationalizing or supporting SMEs internationalize the elegant way. Okay, so what is the elegant way? The elegant way for us means a grid of 38 indicators combined to tell us which we consider to be the determinants of the competitiveness of SMEs. And we look at these 38 indicators, 17 of them containing data on the size of the firms, through two lenses. Lens one, we would look at the determinants of competitiveness that relate to the company itself, to those that relate to the most immediate business environment. most importantly, the trade and investment support institutions around the company. And three, we would look at the domestic environment, the macro environment, if you wish. A bit of a parenthesis on the most immediate business environment, and in particular on the contribution of trade and investment promotion organizations to increasing the trade of the SMEs. We will be coming back to you in about 2 weeks with quite interesting data on how much trade and how much GDP is generated by every dollar that is invested in a trade or investment promotion agency. Close the parenthesis. So first is this first lens, the company, the most immediate business environment, and the domestic environment, the macro environment. The other lens through which we will look at the competitiveness of SMEs is by looking at the ability of SMEs to connect, the ability of SMEs to compete, and the ability of SMEs to change. Connect, compete, change is, again, the Greek through which we are going to be looking at the SMEs. Now, what we have done is analyze these 38 indicators and look at them from a geographical point of view, look at them from the lens of the level of development of the country in which the SMEs are present, but also we have zoomed in 25 countries. Now, why 25? Because we have selected countries for which the International Trade Center had conducted company-specific surveys on non-tariff measures. So this is the criteria we have used to take these 25 countries for which we have analyzed these 38 competitiveness indicators, giving you a sense of where the obstacles, the non-tariff obstacles to trade lie, and the third element, where there is an export potential in what those countries export today, but which they are not exploiting enough. Some results, which is what you're interested in learning about. First, what we see is that the competitiveness gap between large and small firms becomes bigger as the level of the development of the country falls. So the lower the level of development, the wider the gap between the small and the large companies in the country. Just to give you a sense, the productivity gap in developing countries is double the size of the productivity gap in developed countries, with the additional element that the productivity wage is also double the gap. Second finding, biggest gap between small and large firms is in connectivity. In connectivity, which we interpret or which we read as being e-connectivity, meaning the ability of the SME to reach consumers, to meet demand, and to outpace competitors. This e-connectivity is particularly acute in landlocked developing countries, with a double whammy, if you wish. The fact that they are landlocked and the fact that e-connectivity is poorer. Third finding, access to finance is the largest impediment for firms' capacity to compete and to change in least developed countries. And when we talk about access to finance, we look at this from two different angles, from the angle of having a bank account, but also from the angle of having access to credit, which is what allows the SME to invest. In terms of geography, medium firms in Europe, and when we think Europe, it's not just the European Union, it's Europe at large, it's geography Europe, if you wish. Medium firms in Europe and Latin America are better prepared than those in other regions. Two small firms are stronger also in Europe and in Latin America than in South Asia or Sub-Saharan Africa. In South Asia, we find that the small companies have a more limited capacity to compete due mostly to poor quality certification. So if there is one element that distinguishes the poorer ranking of small companies in South Asia is quality certification. Thus, that's not the case with large companies in South Asia that are at par with developed countries, but small ones, here is a lever: quality certification. In Latin America, we find very interesting results on very strong firm-level entrepreneurship, outperforming the average of the developing countries. So that's the positive, but we see a bit of a negative in terms of the business environment. So another lever, if we want to capitalize on entrepreneurship in Latin America, we need to work on business environment and more immediate business environment in Latin America. These are some of the findings. The rest to come in this discussion. The conclusion from all of this is significant catching up in regions and at firm level, which means there is a space to improve, a space that would contribute to better quality growth. Next steps for us. So what would you expect from us next for the next outlook? You will expect three things. One, expanded country coverage, and those countries that are interested, whose appetite we've whet with this report, please knock at our door. Second thing to expect from us, we will add a new dimension to the export potential to look at products or services that the country is not exporting today, but which could be exported tomorrow because the potential is there. Third, we will refine our competitiveness grid with more firm-specific data, which we have started collecting. So with this, John, floor back to you.
Thank you, Arantxa. I will now turn to the Chief Economist of the ITC, Marianne Jack-Johnson, to elaborate on some of the very innovative approaches to studying the SMEs, especially what I found very fascinating, the so-called competitiveness grid with 38 variables.
Thank you, John. I will have the job to walk you in less than 10 minutes through this over 200-page document that I spent a large part of the last year on. And I will do this indeed in a way of trying to give you a sense of what you will find in this report. And the first thing to look at is probably this cover page, as it shows you a bit, or gives you a sense of the nature of the report as you would like to position it. You will find a lot of text in the report based on academic literature. We actually worked with academics to write this report. You will find, oh no, it's not on the. You will see this on the cover here. You'll find data. But what's important, we tried to very much fit this report also into the practical world. We try to link it up to what is happening in the real world. We do this through case studies, and we are happy to feature 5 thought leader contributions, global thought leader contributions in this report, and I'm happy that one of the contributors to the report, Minister Adi, is with us today on the panel. The report contains 3 parts. The third part is on data annexes. The first part is a thematic part, and we focus there on the role of SMEs as a missing link for inclusive growth. Arantxa already said this, but I'll give you 3 slides to make this argument again. Those of us who've been working in the trade world, we do know that small and medium-sized enterprises are less productive than large ones, and that they pay lower wages. What is less well known is that this gap in productivity and in wages between small and large enterprises is much bigger in the developing world than in the developed world. It tends to be around double the size of the gap in poor countries than in rich countries. It can be up to 3 or 4 times as big. This matters. It matters because the overwhelming majority of firms in developing countries are SMEs, and because they employ everywhere more than half of the workforce. On average, we count around 70% of the employment in a country will be in SMEs. Often it's much more than that. So therefore, what matters to SMEs matters to people, and it matters probably to the poorer people in your country because it matters to the lower wage income earners. Trade will matter to these people. Why? Because trade contributes to increasing productivity and is good for jobs. That's a story we have often heard. We reflect that evidence in the report. We also contribute new evidence. We report, for instance, finding from a paper on Tunisia that finds that being connected to international market in Tunisia, which means importing and exporting, boosts firms' productivity by 143%, profitability by 196%, and contributes significantly to job creation. So competing internationally, managing to connect is good. It's good for growth and it's good for inclusiveness because you manage to help the smaller and more vulnerable firms of your country to connect to markets. But the big question is, how are we going to do this? Because typically SMEs are less well connected to global market. And that's where the second part of the report comes in, SME competitiveness. Humbly, we call it a pilot assessment. It's the first time we conduct this assessment, and it's the first time we present it. How does this assessment fit within the world of competitiveness that you are already familiar with the types of reports you have already seen? Well, the way we define competitiveness is a standard one. We focus, however, on the firm level, and we define competitiveness along lines of business. We don't talk about countries, we talk about firms. But our definition is not size specific. We do not think that a small firm needs to do something else than a large firm in order to be competitive. We use data that are publicly available from trustable sources, World Bank, WIPO, and others. So no reinventing the wheels there. We also use an approach of assessing competitiveness that we believe is in line with other approaches, for instance, the one used in the WEF reports. And indeed, using our own approach, we find our first findings on competitiveness reflect quite well findings on productivity that we know from the literature. So our findings seem to be in line with what we know, but they contribute new things. The report complements what already exists in the following way. We have a much more explicit focus on the firm level rather than the national environment, what is more standard. When it comes to policy environment, we do not only look at the national level, but also at the immediate business environment. We think that local institutions matter, regional institutions matter, sectorial institutions matter. We put a stronger emphasis than others on the dynamic aspects of globalization, and in particular on the need to be agile and ready to change all the time. And in part of the statistics of the data, we use new ITC data, and we represent them in the report. On competitiveness, the grid was already introduced, also by Arancha. In our way of defining and assessing competitiveness, we look at 3 pillars of competitiveness. We believe that firms have to be able to connect to market information, to know about supply and demand all the time. This is necessary to compete at any given moment in time, and it's necessary to be able to change when it's necessary. And whether you are able or not to do this, to connect, compete, change, is determined by your own behavior, by the firm level. It's determined by the macro policy environment. It's also determined at the immediate business environment. And the data you will find in the report will therefore allow you to assess along those pillars of competitiveness and the layers of competitiveness where things may not be going well in your country and what it may be possible to do to boost SME competitiveness in your country. That's what country profiles look like. Quite complex, quite rich. I invite you to look at them in detail. I will just say, introduce one of those radar charts to you because this is maybe the most complex charts we have in the report. In the radar charts, you will be able to see these colors. Light blue tells you something about capacity to change, dark blue, capacity to connect, middle blue, capacity to compete, and middle blue, capacity to connect. You will see how a country performs in these 3 pillars. And in these particular charts where we look at the firm level, you will see how small firms behave, how medium-sized firms behave, and on how large firms behave. And one thing you already see is what Arancha mentioned. In the LDCs, small firms perform significantly worse than large firms, while the differences are much less important in rich countries, as we see here. Now, what these radar charts allow you is to look at in which pillar is the distance between small and large bigger than in others? In which particular indicator is this the case? And therefore to analyze what is going on for your firms in your country. So the report does not only give you information about how your firms behave, how the immediate business environment is performing, how the national business environment is performing. It adds two elements based on ITC data. It gives you information about the type of product lines in which a country may still have unexploited potential. It gives you also information on whether those product lines are product lines with a lot of SMEs or not. And it gives you information on whether or not SMEs may be facing NTMs and be suffering from them, and explains to you where this is mostly the case. So we think that these profiles give a uniquely comprehensive picture of the challenges and opportunities for SMEs, and we believe this will be interesting not only for policymakers, but also for investors and for multinationals that may be interested in working with SMEs in your country.
Thank you, Marion. For those in the audience who are in the world of Twitter, you can use the hashtag SME Outlook to interact with the rest of the universe. Now we'll turn to our first guest panelist, His Excellency the Minister of Commerce and Industry of Liberia, Mr. Axel Eddy. So you have the floor.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, first of all, let me say a big congratulations to the ITC team. I think this is a fantastic document that is quite useful for policymakers like myself who have to tackle decision in terms of how do we empower and inspire young entrepreneurs that can transform the SMEs from micro to small, small to medium to large enterprises in Africa. It's a pleasure to contribute to this effort. Fortunately, Liberia is not in this one, so I've already tasked around to make sure that we're included in the next one, because the information is quite important. Our president has been working on our agenda for transformation now for a little over a decade, and we've put in the necessary pillars. Much of our investment is going into infrastructure, power, energy, roads, ports. All of these will help transform SMEs operators. And so much credit is to her leadership to promote an entrepreneurial culture and transform SMEs as major contributors in our economy. The numbers are very clear. They account for the majority of firms in countries like mine. Most of them operate in the informal sector. And what is most critical to me, and actually it's a problem across the globe, is this huge youth bulge. It's not only in Liberia. It's more of a bigger challenge in Liberia because we don't necessarily have the resources to accommodate a growing youth population that is interested in one thing: jobs. At the end of the day, all of the issues you hear around the globe on the news about young people and their response to not being able to answer that question comes to George. And SMEs can help drive that. In Africa, in ECOWAS, they account for 80% of their employment opportunity, mostly in the informal sector. So this report is very timely. Very timely, especially when we've just celebrated the new Sustainable Development Goal, which, in terms of financing those very ambitious goals, a lot of it will come to transforming how we as Africans consume, particularly when you have a continent of mostly young people, that you move away from being net consumers to net producers. It comes back to SMEs, and then the work that ITC is doing will help bridge that gap. Earlier this year, the president signed into law what we call the Small Business Empowerment Act. Again, in an effort to make sure that we meet some of the mandates of our SME policy, which we launched 2 years ago. And that law created a new department within the Ministry of Commerce with specific function on SMEs, providing support in terms of facilitating access to finance, providing support in terms of facilitating access to markets, and ensuring that we provide the training opportunities and provide the network of training providers, capacity development providers that could help SMEs transform their businesses. The law also mandates that all government institutions must spend 25% of their goods and services budget on small and medium enterprises, with a specific requirement for 5% on women-owned businesses. We're beginning to see some of this translate into direct impact with SMEs, as we see that the budget, our national budget, created about $80 million in business opportunities for SMEs. We hope that this process will lead to the formalization of many SMEs that operate in the informal sector, because now, there are opportunities within the public sector where they can go after contracts. This represents a key pillar of our inclusive growth agenda. We also see the WTO session, as many of you know in this room, that Liberia recently, our package was accepted and adopted at referendum for the ministerial in December. We believe the commitments in the session package will also lead to domestic reform that are going to create a more enabling environment where SMEs can thrive. I can tell you, for example, if you were to ask the average SME, the process of paying taxes, many people don't know what that is, and oftentimes it's a very long process. So some of the reform that the WTO session process calls for is going to help make the business environment more transparent and more predictable. We as a government are also taking on a number of initiatives. One of it is to sort of transform our textile industry, for example. And I often say, sometimes domestic resource mobilization isn't necessarily government taxing businesses more. It's government just changing its spending behavior. So by passing a law saying we're going to spend 25% of our budget on SMEs, that's just altering our spending behavior slightly. We now have a campaign called Wear Your Pride. We're trying to unlock the potential of the textile industry. So now all government officials on Fridays have to wear something made in Liberia. That is translating into incomes for SMEs in the textile industry. And we're beginning to see some of those talented Liberian designers use the local fabric to make some amazing fabric that hopefully will get them into global markets. We can have it in Geneva. And so we also have the annual SME conference, which provide opportunities for the best practice around the globe to be presented in Liberia, and then create linkages of exchange between Liberian SMEs and SMEs abroad. This year, our focus is on youth employment and youth empowerment and youth innovation. So this year's conference is focused primarily on young people. And there again, we'll be bringing SMEs from all around the country. We'll be bringing some SMEs from abroad, mostly young entrepreneurs and young innovators, and create an opportunity for dialogue and exchanges. When we did this the first year, we raised about $500,000 in impact investment for SMEs. Last year, we raised about $600,000 in terms of different types of investment for SMEs. And more of those SMEs now, we get about 400 people, 400 to 500 participants every year. And so every year, people are looking forward to this. So these initiatives are driving some of these activities. When we talk about non-tariff measures, huge impediments to cross-border trade, huge impediments to regional trade. And so, again, back to the commitment within the WTO session process, that is going to help us eliminate some of these barriers and hopefully make it easier for our SMEs to trade cross-border.
Thank you, Minister Eddie. I will now turn to my left to Ambassador Esteban Canegos of the Philippines to the WTO to tell us what he thinks of this report, the riots report. Looking at the report, some SMEs account for 50% of the trade of some Asia Pacific countries. So you have the floor, sir.
Okay, thank you, John. And like Axel, I'd like to start by congratulating the ITC and its dynamic executive director and staff of ITC for the launch of this publication, which we are told would just be the first of a series of reports on SME competitiveness. Okay, Rancha, just the first. All right.
Not the last.
Okay. Now, I find this report, this publication, relevant and timely. You will recall that just a few weeks ago, the UN adopted its 18 Sustainable Development Goals. Goal 8 of the 18 speaks of micro, small, and medium enterprises. Second point, Also, very recently in ASEAN, that's my region, our ministers adopted a 15-year blueprint for the further development of SMEs in ASEAN. And number 3, closer to home, in WTO, just last week, the Philippines, with our co-sponsors, Malaysia, Brunei, and now PDR, submitted a formal proposal to the General Council calling for the fostering of the participation of micro, small, and medium enterprises in regional and global markets. Incidentally, for short, we refer to it as MISPI. You should not forget this acronym. After what Arancha said about the missing middle, the missing beginning, MISPI should stick to your minds. All right, MISPI. So, what was the objective of this proposal? Essentially 2 things. First, with this proposal, we wanted to enhance and deepen further the existing dialogue that we already have in the WTO on business. And secondly, through this dialogue, again, policy dialogue, to strengthen our linkages with other relevant organizations like IPC on this very important issue of business. After listening to Arancha and to Mario, I can say that this publication will be an invaluable tool for us when we embark on this enhanced discussion, hopefully, because we still have to get GC approval on this. Now to my last point. When my note said, ask the question why. Okay, why do we want enhanced market access for business? Why do we want to capacitate and to further empower our business to make them have more access to finance? Why do we want them to further integrate into the global and regional markets? The answer, the plain, simple answer, is found in part 1 of the report, which is entitled, I think it's Micro, Small, and Medium Enterprises and Global Markets, the missing link in inclusive growth. Mario mentioned about the statistics about how important MISPs are in terms of generating employment, in terms of the number of firms that we have in our countries. 99%, I think, are MISPs, and how MISPs provide the opportunity for women and for the youth to be engaged in national economic building activities in our respective countries. So I will not repeat that. Those statistics, these are self-evident reasons why we should begin to be passionate about SMEs, and I hope you are. Your presence here attests to that. We need to be passionate about this work on micro and small industries. Let me just stress 2 points. First, all of us, all developing countries, especially least developed countries, we all have our national development plans for inclusive growth. We all have our poverty reduction strategies. I tell you, my friends, I cannot conceive of a situation where we will be able to achieve even half of these objectives unless we address and capacitate and empower business in our respective countries. Again, coming closer to home in WTO, one of the objectives of the Marrakesh Agreement establishing the WTO is to take positive steps to ensure the further integration of developing countries and least developed countries in global markets. Once again, unless we in the WTO will have the courage to open our minds and start a dedicated discussion on business, understand them well, what are the challenges, opportunities that are facing them, unless we have the courage to do this and not be afraid to do so, again, I cannot conceive of a situation how we can achieve this objective of the WTO without doing so. So on that note of hope, I'm saying this because our proposal, which was not yet approved at the General Council level, we will present it again at the next GC meeting. but it's important for many developing countries. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you, Ambassador, for that passionate exposition. Indeed. I will now turn to my right to Mr. Enrique Banze, the Assistant Secretary General in charge of the Department of Macroeconomics, Development Finance, and Intra-ACP Programming, who just flew in to participate in this launch. Thank you for making the time, sir. Yeah.
Thank you very much, John. In fact, it's my privilege to come and participate in this event. I mean, always it's good to be in the first event. Others would come, but it's really interesting to be listed as to be participating in the first event. But of course, we are thankful as ACP, I mean, Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific. We are based in Brussels, and we encompass 79 countries. And I have to apologize, my Secretary General couldn't make it because of the previous commitment he has in Berlin at this time. But I have to say that I'm really pleased as ACP representative here, having an account as the report makes specific reference to the ACP countries. And this is really important because for us, one of the pillars in our strategy, intra-ACP programming, is really the private sector. In the private sector, we are focusing on SMEs because the SMEs, as the report says, in our estimates, we estimate an average of 90% of SMEs is enterprises in all ACP countries. So I think, in fact, the study is really close to our estimates ourselves. And why it is important for us. And I think I will join the previous speaker in saying that this year it is really an important one. First, because of the ADIS conference, which had dealt with financing for development, which is a really important thing. And the private sector in the ADIS conference, as you remember, it was a point that was taken. And secondly, because of the SDGs, which really was now being approved. But we had two important major conferences coming up. I mean, the Paris, which has to do with environment, is an important area that will be a statistic one. Of course, the WTO, which will be taking place in Nairobi, it's another one. So, in all these documents and agendas, we see the important role of private sectors and more specifically of SMEs, which they play an important role in our countries. Even if we take Africa alone, today everyone talks about mineral resources. First, it is important to know that mineral resources is not the only product that everyone in the area that we can work on. But the point is that our SMEs are not in a position to participate in this big investment because they have no capital in it. But they have an opportunity to participate as facilitating in our enterprises. So why not take advantages? So it could be a way of including them in the process. So I'm really glad that there is this such a reference, and I think for ACP it is an important one. We'll be working closely next time. One of our focus on SMEs is how do we improve the role of SMEs, having in account that today's, in terms of economics, there is a new geopolitics, we can say. So the cooperation is not only the North-South, but there is also the South-South cooperation. And one of our emphasis will be South-South cooperation, engaging the SMEs. South-South cooperation and the triangular cooperation. Next February, we intend to hold a seminar, a symposium on this issue. And one of the points is to bring the SMEs, focusing on women empowerment and youth entrepreneurship, because we think this is the future for our world. So I wish to congratulate the ITC in bringing this issue timely and I think relevant for ACP. And I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Banzi. Now I'll turn to the Ambassador of Costa Rica to the WTO, yes, over here, Mr. Alvaro Cedino, to give us his thoughts on this new flagship report. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, and I'm very pleased to be here, as always, on ITC events. This report, I find it different from other reports that cross our hands all the time. I feel it has been designed in a very innovative way. From the title itself, that awakens a lot of thought, to the contents. Whatever you read in it, wherever you open it and you read, you realize there are things that you didn't know before, and I love that you're not reading something that has been said before. Second of all, I think it is very readable. It is designed in a way that you can see a lot of material in a very short time. It goes straight to the point. Third, the value proposition it makes, I think it is very distinct. I personally had never seen the world of SMEs from a global scale, and it looks very impressive. It has been really a paradigm shift to see SMEs from this global perspective. So in that sense, I congratulate you for the effort, and I appreciate that this has been created, because somehow I feel this is the new guidebook for policymaking regarding SME competitiveness. Having said that, what I find most remarkable about the report, and I haven't read it all, but I have skimmed through some of the most thought-provoking parts to me, I find is the component of innovation. If I mentally jump back 15 years back, I wouldn't see the word innovation in a conversation for policymakers regarding SMEs. I would still see the linkages, the global value chains, the international trade component, the digitalization of SMEs. But the innovation component that is here, I find most remarkable, because this is the way forward. Most likely an SME that is competitive today will not be competitive in 5 years if they don't do their job at innovating. So this is where I find that most work needs to be done. And the work that I think needs to be done has to do with very few and relatively accessible elements that are the ecosystem of innovation. First of all, the access to technology, so connectivity in a hardware aspect. Second, education. And by education, I not only mean the ability to use this hardware, but the ability to create new software to access the hardware. And third, the component of a culture of innovation. And by culture, I don't mean national culture. I mean an attitude towards exploration, an attitude towards adaptation and resilience to the new environments. The ability to listen and to read to the signs of the market. And also the ability to anticipate whatever is coming. I am not suggesting that in order to be an innovative SME, you have to be a first mover in the market, but you can be a very quick follower, and that will also make you innovative in the long run. So if we are going to place our bets on innovation, which is the case of Costa Rica, we did our homework when it came to trade policy, and we managed to become relatively successful exporting our goods. Then we became also relatively successful linkaging our local companies and products to global value chains. And then we have also become relatively successful transforming into a services sector, a very strong services sector. So the next logical step for us to take is innovation. And in that sense, I think it is very important that we promote more playing and less planning, and that we promote more bypassing and less policy making. I don't want to shoot ourselves on the foot with this. I'm just suggesting that sometimes a culture creates the rules. And in that sense, I always go back to the case of Costa Rica. We abolished our military in 1949, and by abolishing our military, we created a culture of peace. But also sometimes the rules create the culture. Sorry, I just said it the other way around. The rules create the culture. You create a rule in the constitution, you abolish your military, and therefore you have a culture of peace. But sometimes it is the culture that creates the rules. Think about Google. And if that's too far back, think about Uber. They are changing the culture, and they are forcing us to rethink and recreate the rules. So I guess, and the last thing I wanted to say as an opening remark is that from, if I see the title, Connect, Compete, and Change, 3 thoughts come to mind. Not only the digital connectivity, the hardware connectivity that I mentioned, but also the ability to crowdsource, to identify the wisdom and the power of the crowds. And this is something that connectivity through technology to the internet is allowing. Second, when I talk about competitiveness, I visualize the ability to bypass barriers, namely barriers to trade or other sources of barriers that could be skipped if we think innovatively. And third, when I think about change, I can only think about climate change. And it makes me think that SMEs, more and more, as we approach, as we move into the future, are going to have to think whether they are part of the problem or part of the solution regarding climate change. So this is a very big task that we all have, regardless of whether we are in the private sector, in the public sector, whether we are researchers, and I leave this thought to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now, the last panelist on the list, Mr. Christos Gaboris, Chief Economist and Head of Operations at the World Competitiveness Center at the IMD Business School. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon. I'm really very, very happy to be here. It's a privilege for me. Thank you for the invitation. When one participates in a panel like this, and one is the last speaker, as you can imagine, somehow you feel that everything is said. And in some ways, this is how I feel. So this has, on the one hand, the issue is that you have to speak very briefly. And actually, this is what John asked me to do. On the other hand, you have to say something that is slightly different than the previous one. So this is the challenge. And I think that I will just very briefly speak about 3 things that brought my mind by going through this report and by listening to everyone. The first issue that I would like to bring is the necessity of a study like this. As a matter of fact, when I started reading it and I realized that it is the first publication, I was flabbergasted. I couldn't believe it. So I was very happy to hear that it's not the last and there will be a continuation. It is very, very important. I am from Greece. And in my country, right before the crisis, 75% of the working force was employed in small and medium enterprises. And just validating what Marion said before, about more than 50% of that was in non-tradable sectors. And only a little bit more than 20% was in tradable sectors, which basically gives you immediately a path for the solution, what to think about how you can resolve certain problems. And that's why I think it's tremendously necessary. There is another thing, again from Greece, my country. The growth that the country realized during the decade of 2000, right before the crisis, was of course driven by SMEs. After the crisis, right now, as you can imagine, the sector that suffered the most is the SMEs. Most SMEs went bankrupt. The unemployment part of the working force comes mainly from SMEs. And therefore, what I want to say is that at the same time that we look on the benefits that SMEs can bring, at the same time we look the opposite side, which is what are the risks that come along. And this study provides an impressive wealth of valuable information and data, which to me was extremely nice to go through. The issue about the risks brings the second point that I would like to make, which I think the report makes, and drives a difference between goals and implementation. What do we consider as potential things that we would like to achieve, and what we actually can do, the reality check. And as a matter of fact, all the speakers here spoke specifically about realities and policies that, if implemented, they can bring the value creation that comes along with the expansion of the SMEs. And this is extremely important. Which brings me to the third point, and last, John. That in order to accomplish all these things, you need a strategy. So the magical word here was strategy, which I'm sure that you've noticed that all the previous speakers brought up. One way or another, they spoke about the strategy, and the strategy is in two different levels. There is strategy for SMEs, and these are the things and the part of the criteria that the SMEs are responsible for. And then there is a strategy of the environment within SMEs are operating, the countries. And the previous speakers actually were very, very good in outlining precisely the fundamental issues from a country point of view that they will bring the positive effect to the value creation of the SMEs. I would like to end by saying that in the three important criteria that you brought in the study, connect, compete, and change, the three C's. It's interesting because if one takes a step back, sees actually the interplay of both the firm level, the local level, within culture also is a factor, and the country level. I mean, intuitively, if you think about change, SMEs, one will assume, that are much more easy to adapt to new technologies, to new behavior, to something new. On the other hand, if you think about connect, actually it is not absolutely in the control of SMEs, because it implies that there is a certain infrastructure that will allow the connectivity to be performed. And on that note, I congratulate again all the people who made this publication possible, and I thank you very much, John.
Thank you, Christos. Thank you, Christos. Yes, in order to have questions from the floor, I'm going to limit one question to each of the participants on the panel. I'll start first with the Minister. Eddie, sir, your government has this policy of so-called the agenda for transformation. You are a nation where 60% of your youth are under the age of 25. How do you see the SMEs dealing with the question of employment and growth and export potential?
Thank you, John. How much time do you have? So, you know, we launched, the Agenda for Transformation is our development pillar to get Liberia to a certain level of development within 30 years. So, came with some challenges. We had a curveball last year with the health crisis that pretty much sent us back several years. But we do see SMEs as the bedrock of any transformation we are to achieve. Because of our youth population, we have such a large youth population. And if you think about it, the average Liberian is under 25. Anybody who's under 25 come with certain experiences that is evident of a post-conflict environment. Access to proper education, access to adequate health care, access to security, basic services, the ability to live in dignity and peace, you know. So the average Liberian has these challenges to deal with. And so, but what I do see when I drive around Monrovia is innovation, as you were saying. So one key pillar of AFT is driving innovation with our SMEs. It's creating an environment where we can transform that innovation from a local level to a national level and perhaps get them onto global value chains. We are beginning to see this with a number of programs we have in place. I know some of our SMEs in agribusiness, for example. We have a lady named Martha Hendricks who's now exporting spices to fancy New York buyers, and that's something she started 2 years ago, and she has linkages with over 300 farmers that are supplying her products. So it's a tough job, especially when you have an economy that is so driven by primary commodities, iron ore and rubber. The price of those two commodities, it's not favorable at the moment. So the economy has suffered serious setbacks, and this has forced us to look in other areas and to foster greater participation of SMEs.
Thanks, Minister. I gather we're running short on time, so I'm going to reverse the procedure and go interactive and open the floor. All the members in the podium here field questions to our panelists and in particular to the Executive Director here. So, any hands? Go ahead.
Trade Services Division, Global Organization. Amazing report, congratulations. You won't be surprised that I do note that there seems to be services missing from the report, and I hope maybe that will be addressed in future reports. The other issue is informality. In the report, it does say that most SMEs are informal, but I haven't yet found the part about how to overcome
Thank you, Dave, for that question. Yes, services are somewhat underrepresented in the report, which is a pity because SMEs are overrepresented in many services sectors, in particular in tourism, a sector you know very well. One thing I can confirm is from the ACP work we did in another study that surprisingly hotels and restaurants are very badly e-connected in ACP countries. And as a tourist, I'm on the tourist side, I was surprised because when I look for where to go, I go via the internet. So e-connectivity definitely an issue for tourism too. Informality, an important issue we mentioned. We discuss in the section where we discuss the problems to grow from small to medium to large, and in this context to connect to global markets. We have not provided a detailed discussion in this report on how to get out of informality, because the focus of the report lays somewhere else. It lay on how to connect to global markets, and it's true that that's mainly an issue where formal enterprises, also the formal SMEs, will be playing.
Yes, please.
Good afternoon, and thank you for this presentation. I find the report extremely innovative, I think that is the word, and something that has to come to this organization. It's very interesting. I remember Arantxa Gonzalez and also Marian Jansen talking about Latin America and the performance of Latin America. I would like to inquire in this regard, what is exactly, when you refer to the negative business environment, what are the most important issues there? Is it infrastructure? Is it peace? Is it financial markets? And when you refer to the high level of entrepreneurship, what does it do on? Is it innovation? Is it wages? What is the aspect there? Thank you very much.
Thank you for that question. It gives me the opportunity to show a slide I didn't have time to talk about. Now we have what we notice in Latin America and Caribbean, and if we compare it to the richest geographical region in the way we define regions, and the wealthiest region in our sample would be Europe and Central Asia. And if we look at the firm level data, so that's one of our layers, and that will be the bars on the left-hand side, then you will see that if you compare Europe with Latin America, that Latin America performs very strongly in some pillars and change, they are stronger than Europe and Central Asia. It reflects maybe a certain flexibility in those economies that we've maybe lost in the European region. So very strong when you look at what do firms do within the environment. How do they behave? Then when you compare, look at the right bar, the right side, there we look at the same pillars, but from a national level. So there we use the indicators we have for national policy. There you see that on all the pillars, they are behind on Europe and Central Asia. So that would indicate that where things can be improved is at that national level. Really, the difference is not huge. Also there, Latin America is performing well. But for me, those data look as if you shift those bars a bit to the right, that continent can fly. Because at the enterprise level, there is a lot of strong evidence of entrepreneurship.
Any more hands on the floor? Any takers? All right, I'll return. Drilling the panelists then. Ambassador, you mentioned that you'd like to see the WTO more engaged on the SME policy debate. Can you elaborate which areas of the WTO and which committees would fit very well? I've got a few ideas, but I'll leave it to you.
Thank you, John. Well, based on the proposal that we submitted last week, what we're really looking for at this time is a statement in the ministerial conference in Nairobi that first recognizes the importance of business in national economies. Second, how we can improve on the existing dialogue in WTO, make it more focused instead of diffused among several committees. We know, of course, that SMEs is a cross-cutting issue, but the discussion right now is more diffused and focused. The discussion right now in WTO is more sporadic than sustained. We hear about it only once a year, aid for trade, for example, and limited to capacity building. We want to have a more comprehensive discussion approach to the issue of business. And finally, as I said, we wanted the Secretariat to come up with a stock take of all of these things we're doing now in WTO, so we will know how to improve them and perhaps identify the proper institutional arrangement that we could think of where we could conduct and continue with these discussions. But right now, we always emphasize, we are not at the point where we want to negotiate specific disciplines for SMEs. No, what we want is to start a conversation for a more focused discussion. We have first to understand what SMEs are all about, how important micro is, how we can put micro front and center in global trade policy before we can even think. Anyway, membership, depending on how this discussion evolves in the WTO, then the members collectively will decide if they want to move this forward from simply understanding to perhaps a more specific approach on the disciplines. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Ambassador. Sorry. Yes, go ahead, sir.
Sorry, did you mean to interrupt? I wanted to just pick up on that point. Something that always struck me, at least from the perspective of somebody who is actually an SME service provider, albeit in the Western world, basically. It's the fact that when we have discussions in this house, we often take an overly macro perspective, and that macro perspective is in many ways synonymous or connected to the perspective of big players. When we look at SMEs issues, and I suspect that's in here, although I haven't had in the 15 minutes that I have it in my hand, I haven't really had the chance to appreciate what is in there. You see that what SMEs really face most or encounter most, or what hinders them most in their innovation, in their change, in their connectedness, is often on the regulatory level. And at that regulatory level, that in the area of goods we have tackled somewhat in this house, but in the area of services, we're way behind. And I think it's that aspect that might respond to exactly what the ambassador just said. That's what we sometimes, what I'm sometimes missing, also as somebody who advises governments and companies the associations on this level said that the trade policy world climbs down and comes to those issues that matter for those 70, 80, or 90% of our economies. And that means looking head on into trade 2.0, meaning regulatory issues, much more in depth than we've done so far.
Thank you, sir. I'll turn to a question to one of our panelists, and Mr. Banji, from the ACP perspective, e-connectivity has been highlighted as one of the weak links for SMEs. How much is it in your organization's priorities to enhance e-connectivity, not only in terms of the internet, but I was thinking also e-connectivity, transportation connectivity, especially for LDCs, landlocked LDCs and small island states, because a lot might have the goods but not ships to pick them up.
Now, thank you, John. I think in your question you have the answer. In fact, this is a challenge, and one of the problems that we face, in fact, in the ACP countries is e-connectivity. I wish to say that during the debate on the EDIS, in our position paper, one of the issues we got is just notifications and then e-connectivity, which is really important one, and especially if we talk about landlocked country. And I will join Ambassador Alvaro here, that in one way we have the two problems. One way is e-connectivity, but also in terms of physical terms. In physical terms, I mean, most of our countries are agricultural, in fact. And one of the problems that we face is that how do we link the productive areas to the markets? And then the issue of infrastructures comes in. And you have problems of roads, you have problems in some terms, telecommunications, but you have also the problems of railways, which is a huge investment. So the way we look at it is, bringing again energy, which is one of the problems in energy. So in the ACP, the way we see it is that we should have some kind of integrated approach. We are not just looking for the small SMEs, especially in the countryside, which is the basic problem, but we have to see it as an integrated approach. And when investors come, of course, we have to offer an integrated project, and we see which roles each of the investors should play. So it's really something that we do really need very much, and we're encouraging our investors to participate. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We're running out of time. This room is very popular. In a run-up to Nairobi, everyone's very busy. So I'll have to pass the floor to Arantxa to make the closing remarks.
Well, these closing remarks mostly to thank you for this positive reaction that we get from the floor. This is a big bonus for an SME called ITC. We also are an SME at the end of the day. Within our peers, we are within the small category, but as a good SME that we think we have to be, we've innovated. And what we bring you today and the reactions we get are encouraging is that this innovation is pertinent. The debate over SMEs is here to stay. It's in the UN Global Goals. It's in the G20, who's just set up an SME forum. If what I read about TPP is true, and I hope it is, there is plenty of SMEs in TPP. If you read the communication that the European Commission just put out today on the future of its trade policy, it's all about SMEs. So I think, Ambassador, you have a good you have a good horse. So keep feeding the horse. If you need more food, we will provide you with all the food that you need to get your horse to the finish line, because this is, in my view, a winning horse. SMEs are also an integral part of the trading system, and they have to be paid a bit more attention. Finally, we have put a lot of love and a lot of work into this report. There may be things in there that we didn't get right. So please get back to us if you find anything in here that requires refining, redoing, relooking at, rejigging. Also, please come to us if you need to interpret, especially the country-specific data. There is a wealth of information there that you, and through you, your SME agencies, your financial agencies, your banks, and other operators in country may want to have a good grip on. We are there for you, so please come and knock at my colleague's door. They will be more than happy to have interested customers. Thanks again, and hope to see you next year for the next edition.